Okay, so looking at the deep view, this is the superior side of the skull, the anterior and posterior portion of the skull. The face is just down here. We're going to work our way through all the foramina and various holes inside the skull. So first we have the olfactory foramina. Those are those little teeny tiny dots on the ethmoid bone. See them all through there. Try to focus them a little better for you. Okay. And then as we work our way down from the ethmoid bone to the sphenoid bone in this area, just underneath each of the lesser wings, we have these two little holes right here and right here. That's the optic canal. So if we were to actually tilt this over and kind of look through, you actually are looking through the orbit. You can see it from this side, right there, that little hole. Okay, so olfactory foramina, the optic canal. And as we're working our way down, we can actually see those lines. See that long line right there? It looks exactly the same on either side, the left or right side of the skull. That line is the inferior orbital fissure that we talked about that looks like an X from the orbit side, okay? And many of these same features we're gonna see on the inferior side of the skull if we flip it over from here on out, okay? So we're gonna start with this first hole right here, just below that inferior fissure. We have the foramen rotundum, and working our way down on the outside we have the foramen ovale. So you can think of the rotundum as kind of like a circle, like a rotunda. The ovale does look a lot like an oval, and then the little one right below that's the foramen spinosum. And if we work our way more medially, then we have the foramen lacerum, this large foramen right here, okay? So the olfactory foramina, the optic canal, you can see the inferior orbital fissure, then the foramen rotundum, the foramen ovale, the foramen spinosum, and the foramen lacerum. And then as we work our way back through the temporal bone and back towards the end of the occipital bone, we can see the jugular foramen. So there's this, again, this is the same on either side. And so they look almost like a heart shape. We can see the hypoglossal canals. There's one on either side, right here, right here. And they're on either side of this large hole. This is the largest foramen in your skull, or for that matter in your body. This is your foramen magnum. And so this is the passageway, the transition point from your brain into your spinal cord. So your spinal cord passes right through here. The foramen magnum, or literally large hole. All right, from an inferior view, we can see some of these same features, okay? Remember, we already talked about the incisive foramen up here, or foramina, right? One of them is a foramen. And we're going to focus on some of these others. We just saw most of these on the inside, on the deep view. But there, if you remember, the one that was more medial was the foramen lacerum, okay? The one on the outside that looks like a really pretty oval is the foramen ovale. And there's the foramen spinosum. So we've already talked about all three of those. Again, the same on both sides. We've already talked about the foramen magnum, the large hole. And we've talked about the sort of heart shape. I'm going to kind of turn it there. The sort of heart-shaped hole, the lower hole there, you can see, that's the foramen, the jugular foramen. We've got a few additional holes that you couldn't see a minute ago. One of them is the stylomastoid foramen, and it's named because this is the styloid process right here, that pencil-looking shape sticking up, and this is the mastoid process, so that's easy to remember, the stylomastoid foramen. We have one of those on this side as well. And then the last thing we have is the carotid canal, and so that's it right here. All right, so on the medial side, we have the foramen lacerum, the foramen ovale, the foramen spinosum. We have the carotid canal, the jugular foramen right here, and the stylomastoid foramen. And of course, the foramen magnum. And if we turn the skull a little bit, you can also see the hypoglossal canal. So remember, the hypoglossal canal sits kind of on the edge of this condyle right by the foramen magnum. And then last but not least, we have the internal and external acoustic meatus. So think about this is where your connections to your ears come in and out of the skull. So there's your external acoustic meatus right there. Okay? And if we're to follow that hole to the inside, okay, we would see here right above the jugular foramen, that's the internal acoustic meatus. So remember the jugular foramen, kind of get it at an angle where you can see it. So the jugular foramen is going to be that heart shape, and then just superior to that, just above that, is the internal acoustic meatus. And now you have learned all of the foramina of the skull.